What historical event 100% reads like a time traveler went back in time to alter history? The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Somebody throws a grenade at his car, and it blows up behind him. That's the first incident of time travel, stopping the assassination. Later, as he goes back, the driver realizes that he's on the same route where the grenade was thrown, and they try to turn around. The whole procession of cars stalls, and a guy who just happened to be sitting there, goes over and shoots him. That's a second time traveler, fixing what the first had done. Since the whole thing lit off World War I and led to the rise of Hitler and then World War II, I kind of wonder what Ferdinand would have started if he hadn't been killed. It must have been pretty bad for them to send a second time traveler to put Nazi Germany back into the timeline. Fidel Castro's assassination attempts being dodged is so unrealistic, really, he dodged about 600, that it feels like a time traveler went back and foiled every single one of them. The American Civil War's first real battle was at Bull Run on land belonging to a Mr. McLean. After that he said, "Screw this, I'ma move to the country and avoid this war." He moved to Appomattox Courthouse, VA, where Lee surrendered to Grant. In the McLean's living room. The Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky was sentenced to death by firing squad, and just as they were preparing the groups to be shot, a messenger came with a letter from the Tsar, forgiving them, and the sentence was changed to prison labor. He later went on to write some of the most influential novels of all time. A Belgian businessman was instrumental to the Manhattan Project's success. Realizing uranium's importance, he shipped 1,200 tons of it to Staten Island. When Lieutenant Colonel Nichols contacted him, he simply responded, "You can have the ore now. It is in New York. I was waiting for your visit." Franz Ferdinand's assassination. It was so much happenstance, shenanigans, and tomfoolery that it's like a special achievement in a Hitman game. Da Vinci. The madman designed a tank in the 1500s. Tsutomu Yamaguchi. Survived both the bombings at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Reads like a satirical time traveler story where the protagonist screws up his dates. When Andrew Jackson's assassin attempted to shoot him, both of his flintlock pistols misfired. Andrew Jackson had to be restrained after almost beating the assassin to death with his cane. The two flintlocks were examined after the incident and found to be in good condition. Tesla's AC polyphase system. 1 minute, we're in the Stone Age of electrical distribution, and the next, Buffalo, New York is being powered by the alternating current being generated at Niagara Falls by Tels's Genius system. Stanislav Petrov was a Soviet lieutenant known as the man who saved the world. Tensions were riding between the Soviet Union and the United States, so on the 26th of September in 1983, he was on duty for a nuclear early warning system. The system detected multiple missiles launched by the United States, but Petrov broke protocol, following his instincts by choosing not to report the danger to his higher-ups. The missiles turned out to be a false alarm, as he had thought, and, as Petrov's title suggests, he very well may have saved the world that day. Saving the world just off of a hunch definitely seems like something a time traveler might do. Sus. Edit. Change the 16th to the 26th. During the War of 1812, seems like a time traveler with weather control capabilities started a freak tornado that effectively ended the British occupation of Washington. More British soldiers were killed by the tornado's flying debris than by the guns of the American resistance. There was a shipwreck in 1664, a shipwreck in 1785, and a shipwreck in 1820. Each had one survivor. Each survivor was named Hugh Williams. I remember this comment about a bumbling time traveler trying to kill Adolphe Sax, inventor of the saxophone, because they hate their sax lessons, and I can totally see it because of how many things that almost killed him. I would say there is significant evidence Fidel Castro. Every single assassination attempt failed, sometimes because of wildly miscellaneous circumstances, including a sabotaged diving suit that somehow got miraculously switched with someone else, who ended up drowning in his place. Dude holds the world record for over 600 attempts, I believe. A book that predicted the sinking of the Titanic. Futility. The wreck of the Titan. The false alarm that almost turned the Cold War from a sleeping volcano into the eruption of Mr. Helena. This event could easily have resulted in the highest casualties in the shortest time period in human history. Actually, forget human history, the greatest mass death since the extinction of the dinosaurs. One man was at the helm making that decision, and it seems like one of the few points in human history, where by some slim sliver of luck or fate, a great disaster was averted. Time travel vibes like whoa. If you read up on his life, you'll find there are so many times Adolf Hitler almost died, but somehow survived, that makes me think there is a time traveler war going on. A faction trying to kill Hitler, because it's Hitler, and a faction preventing his death, because the guy who would replace him was even worse than Hitler. Richard Lawrence tried to assassinate Andrew Jackson, but both of the pistols he attempted to fire at him misfired. Then Jackson proceeded to beat this fellow with his cane. While the assassin was not a time traveler, once certainly could have sabotaged his pistols with a spritz of water on each. Nikola Fukkin Tesla. Earth was going to be torn apart by a rogue black hole, so Nikola came back to a time when he could get the materials to build a death ray, save the Earth ray, but wouldn't have to answer to anyone about building it. He then shot it right through the Earth, creating the Tunguska event, which altered the path of the black hole. We all lived. He went mad and died because he couldn't go back to his present. God, no wonder he was such a clean fetishist. Imagine if you had to go back and live in 1908, before antibiotics and the FDA. Mendeleev, who created the periodic table, was struggling to order the elements in a specific order, pattern. He then was able to order them like we see today after having a dream, where all the elements fell into place, even leaving gaps for elements that hadn't yet been discovered. I know it's not exactly a major historical event, but it's been the foundation of science for over a century. But when I first heard, I thought it was a bit suspicious how it all fell into place. On Christopher Columbus's first voyage, there are reports of strange lights following them as they approach land. I think these are time tourists going back to watch it all happen. The election of 1876. The 2016 elections have nothing on 1876. When the Persians, Muslims, were about to invade Europe, they were suddenly and inexplicably stopped as their invasion fleet fell to Greek fire. Artists of the era made paintings showing a small number of Greeks destroying hundreds of ships with what clearly looks to be some sort of portable flamethrower. No one in antiquity had ever mentioned or used Greek fire before that event, and no one since has ever used it again. We still have no idea what the fuck it was. All we know is it appeared out of nowhere and stopped a monumental invasion. Jack Ruby clearly was sent to kill Lee Harvey Oswald, so no one would ever discover it wasn't him who killed Kennedy. I have an older one. Sometime between 200 BC 100 AD. The ancient Greeks had invented an early prototype steam engine, Aeolipile. But they really didn't give it much further thought. The ancient Greeks were clever, but somehow, no one seemed to realize the potential of this invention. It never developed beyond being more than just a curiosity. Had these ancient Greek designs been more widespread, there is a good chance the Industrial Revolution could have happened 1,500 years earlier. But honestly, it seemed like someone was intervening to prevent these designs from being disseminated. Edit spelling thanks you, Havartner. Just whoever has been working in The Simpsons writer's room. Julian the Apostate, a Roman emperor from the 4th century that tried to reverse back from Christianity to paganism, which is exactly what a time traveler Roman Weibo would do. Also, there is the famous incident of his death, which was caused by a spear injury in a battle, which he took because he forgot to put on his breastplate before the battle started. Something clearly done by a time traveler who is not familiar with the world around him, a time traveler trying to conceal his journey back to his own time. Nothing can convince me that he was not. If the time traveler can control weather, the divine wind, that stopped the Mongol invasion of Japan. Wernher von Braun in his sci-fi book The Mars Project about the colonization of Mars stated that the Martian government was directed by 10 men, the leader of whom was elected by universal suffrage for 5 years and entitled Elon. 2 houses of parliament enacted the laws to be administered by the Elon and his cabinet. Edgar Allan Poe writes about an event 40+ years in the future. Basically, Poe writes about 4 people who are starving at sea, draw straws, and kill and eat the loser, cabin boy Richard Parker. 40-odd years later 4 people are adrift at sea in a lifeboat, one drinks seawater and goes into a coma. When they draw straws for who will be eaten, the coma guy gets the short straw in a development that surprises no one. And so the 3 other men kill and eat the cabin boy. Richard Parker. Seriously. I'd say the Battle of Midway. The major turning point in the naval war in the Pacific. The battle destroyed the single most powerful naval strike force in history and shifted the balance of power to the U.S. The actual course of events during the Battle of Midway was a series of near misses for the U.S. until, conveniently, 2 separate airstrike forces arrived at the same time to decimate 3 out of 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. Absolutely amazing providence. It wouldn't be surprising if Nancy Wake was a time traveler. She was just too damn good at special ops against the Nazis. Isaac Newton discovered calculus, the laws of motion, and the fundamentals of optics all by himself. A time traveler must have paid him a visit. There's a book I read as a kid about a time traveler who goes back to biblical times and with advanced weaponry kills an entire army in the span of a day. Supposedly based on a sentence in the Old Testament. One day I stayed home from school, I read through the Bible and looked for that sentence. I eventually found it and the corresponding interpretation. It's about an angel of God who came and struck an entire army. The interpretation I read was that it was really a plague, but to me it still reads like a time traveler. Rasputin. Literally just Rasputin. The reason why there weren't enough lifeboats on the Titanic is because so many time tourists wanted to see the disaster firsthand and overloaded the ship. The book The Wreck of the Titan, or Futility, was actually a historic reference but was altered into a novella in 1912 after the actual sinking in order to disguise this fact. I'll go first. Archduke Franz Ferdinand bleeding out from an assassin because the suit he had been sewn into for the perfect fit couldn't easily be cut off him fast enough to stop the bleeding. Q World War I. Wiki. Yes, I shamefully stole this from Today I Learned, Cold Sweat Smile. Not history, but still. In the book of Exodus, it says the Hebrews followed God across the desert. He appeared as a cloud of dust by day and a pillar of fire by night. Seems like an airship would kick up dust during the day, but all you'd see at night would be the flames, propulsion through the dust. 100% Franz Ferdinand's death. Not many people know this, but one of the lookouts on the Titanic accidentally left his binoculars behind before the voyage, and some theorize that could be the reason he couldn't have seen the iceberg in time. A time traveler 100% could have sabotaged the binoculars somehow. Nelson Mandela. They created a term for mass misremembering as a result. It's called the Mandela effect. And I remember clearly Nelson Mandela dying in jail. I remember because I remember the world coming together to mourn such a travesty. But that didn't happen. He got out of jail and became a political leader. Fuck the Bears. I seriously remember mourning his death. Jimmy Page moved with his parents to Miles Road, Epsom at Surrey. When they enter on their new house, there was only one thing inside, an acoustic guitar. Jimmy Page was 12 by this time. To those who don't know, Jimmy became one of the greatest guitarists of all time. The final part of World War II, where the Nazis were researching all kinds of magical and psychic things in order to create magic super soldiers and shit. IDK what the fuck they researched, but I do know they were desperate for any kind of advantage. The first and only detection of a magnetic monopole. Either a time traveler's joke or faux pas. Or perhaps the reverse is true, a conspiracy to keep monopoles under wraps, except for that one initial oops. This experiment ran for some months with no success, and was eventually relegated to being checked up on only a few times a day. In February of 1982, Valentine's Day fell on a Sunday, and Cabrera didn't come into the lab. When he returned to the office on the 15th, he surprisingly found that the computer and the device had recorded exactly 8 magnetons just shy of 2 p.m. on February 14, 1982. The USSR went on a crazy industrialization spree, like killing a large portion of their population for some reason. Just as the 5-year plan was wrapping up, the Nazis attacked. If they didn't industrialize, I don't think the Allied forces would have won WW2. John Tierney was the first fatality of the Hoover Dam project. 13 years to the day later, the last fatality of the project occurred. It was Patrick Tierney, John's son. I read this theory in a similar thread but on a different webpage a few years back that Hitler was a time-traveling assassin, something along these lines. Hitler is born a few hundred years into the future when humanity faces a crisis where a single man is about to blow up Earth, the usual stuff in these stories. Hitler is selected because of talents, smarts to travel back to when this dude is born and kill him. Easeeps, right? Not right. The time machine doesn't work. Instead he's thrown back hundreds of years to 1920s Germany, and all he knows is that hundreds of years in the future, one man will destroy everything. The only thing he knows about this man is that he is of Jewish descent. Yeah, you get the picture. The guy who didn't react to the false ballistic missile alarm during the Cold War. Satoshi Nakamoto. He came out of nowhere, invented Bitcoin, and then disappeared. Easiest $1 trillion play.